thank you so much for coming in and joining me, Sam. It's been ages since we last had a proper chat, and you've done so much in the music industry. I'm really looking forward to listening to it today. Thank you so much for giving up your time.
You're very welcome. It is a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to talk about things. It's a lot of fun.
Awesome. So, first of all, let's go to your musical origins, the origin story of Mr. Sam Brown. Um,
Ooh.
can we first of all have like a generalistic overview of your experience in the music industry before we go into deeper detail?
Yeah, I guess origin story. I guess my family are quite musical. Like my grandparents are beautiful singers. Actually, my mum has played a lot of instruments growing up. My older brother was a guitarist and did that from a young age. So that really kind of like inspired me to pick up the bass when I was about 13. But previous to that, I'd done all the things in school, like played the recorder. Got very good at playing it with my nose as well, I might add. Um, I played trumpet for a little bit. I wasn't great at trumpet, and I think I only really discovered the music I really loved with that when I was about basically when it was too late to probably start working really hard at it. I think I'd been bitten by the bass bug then. But yeah, picked up the bass at 13 because I saw my brother was in a band. I saw his bass player, and I was like, "That's a cool instrument," and it looked super cool. And I liked the idea of playing bass with my brother, which is really really cool. So I so yeah, I picked up the bass at 13, and then that kind of overshadowed most of the stuff I was doing. Joined some bands, got really into it, and was kind of inspired to apply to BIM when I was 18, and I got through in the application. 3 years in music college, a couple of cruise ships, a couple of hotels in the Middle East later, uh, hundreds of weddings, good corporate events, a couple of little festivals and stuff like that. And now I've been teaching at BIM for 4 years, so it's come bizarrely full circle and something I'm very, very grateful for.
Brilliant. Now, before we go into a bit more detail, what drew you to bass specifically, to the bass guitar? Because you said that you picked it up to play along with your brother in a band, but what made you stick with bass rather than going off it and not onto a different instrument like you did with trumpet?
It is a good question. I don't know if sometimes I believe in that sort of spiritual aspect of the instrument chooses you. But I play a couple of little bits and pieces. Like I play a bit of guitar, and I'm not great on guitar, but I've got enough to kind of strum out some chords and stuff, which is exactly what I did in my gig last night. And then that's kind of got me into doing some other stuff as well, bizarrely as well. Like definitely an area of weakness for me. But people are like, still want to do a gig on this? I'm like, well, yes. Now you asked. Um, but the bass specifically, I think it's kind of where it started. I thought it was a really cool looking instrument. And I'm gonna do that thing in my brain where I'm like, did I think it was going to be any easier than guitar? I don't know, but I think I really like that sort of really cool, funky percussive edge you can do with it. And then you discover guys you can play super melodically and like all the slap bass stuff. And then you kind of end up coming back full circle to just loving playing, like old school bass grooves and Motown and sitting on the same notes for
James
ages.
Jameson, man, James Jameson.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it is. I think I mean, I suppose it's maybe like a bass education cliche thing, but it is that kind of like cool interconnectivity. You're like somewhere between the melody and the drums. You're in this cool supportive harmony. You know, you're kind of in this space, which sometimes requires devastatingly little, and then sometimes you can play out quite a lot. And finding the taste between those two can can slip and
Yes.
slide. I can tell you that. I can tell you that. I'm definitely guilty of being like, can I do something here? And then before I've thought about doing it, I've done it anyway. But yeah, I think for me, it's that actually this kind of this space between like the harmony and the melody and the
Yes.
drums. It's kind of this beautiful little lane of its own.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Absolutely. In fact, I can completely resonate with that. Oh, because I loved it when you said I don't know if it's about the thing where like the instrument chooses you. It makes me think of that scene in Harry Potter with like the wand chooses you kind of thing. And I completely agree with that because for me, when I started with music, I was singing, but I was always very bass, and those sort of bassy frequencies really, really stuck
Mm.
with me. Hence why I was stuck with bass as well. So What was your experience as a music student from secondary education onwards? Some of your best memories, some stuff that really inspired you to be a musician.
Oh, I was really lucky. I mean, I like my sort of mainstream music education classes didn't inspire me a huge amount in school. And I think that was due to like not having the not really connecting with stuff the students might actually be listening to. It was all, you know, romantic, modernist era stuff, and I just didn't know any students who were listening to that. What I was lucky to have was a guitar teacher by the name of Paul Rawson, who I kind of went to sort of just learn music theory and stuff, uh, so I could, well, because I was looking to gotta get better and wanting to communicate with my bandmates on their level, because I had some very, very musically talented and very musically educated bandmates. Um, and Paul was amazing for me because, bless, I wasn't always the greatest student. I'd bumble in 5 or 10 minutes late because I never wore a watch and forgot what time our lessons were all the time. But I'd always come in and just like play a riff or something to warm up, and he'd be like, "Oh, cool, you know that Rage Against the Machine riff." So we'd just play Rage Against the Machine and Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath and Cream riffs forever. And he'd sort of be like, "I'll listen to this," and sometimes we'd just jam. And then one day, he kind of turned around to me and went, "Have you thought about maybe taking this further?" And I was like, I I don't know. I hadn't really, and I wasn't really at the time. He said maybe you should think about applying somewhere to BIM. So he was the first person who kind of put that seed in my mind, and I didn't really kind of act on it for a couple of years later because I did some different stuff, like sixth form level, and funnily enough, I think it was one of the earliest gigs I did with an old band who I'm still very good friends with all those guys today. But at like our second or third gig, um, the the singer guitarist's family, I think, had come down from Bristol, and he went, "Oh, Sam, this is like my honorary uncle Paul," and I was like, "Oh my God, he taught me guitar when I was in secondary school. Like he's almost like the reason I'm here." And my friend Ricky was like, "What?" I was like, "Yeah, man." So I kind of connected with Paul, and I said, "I don't know if you remember, you taught me in secondary school," and he was like, you know. So we had and he does like film and like library composition stuff now. So it was super cool to reconnect with
Wow.
him, and he ended up doing some remixes for my old band. But he was actually, if I sort of look back on some things, he was probably the person who kind of put these like the inception of the thought in my mind. So um, yeah, I think having someone who can kind of latch onto your interests and encourage you to go and check out other things and get good at the thing you want to do, I think is really important.
Yeah. I think that's definitely, you've hit the nail on the head there. It's one of the most important things, especially for mainstream music teachers as well. Yes, in GCSE and stuff, you have to teach about classical music and everything, which in a way is good for some students, but only very, very few. The vast majority I found want to learn about modern rock and pop music, which is why I like teaching BTEC music, because it's very much focused on the modern music industry, modern performance skills, modern, composing skills. And yes, you can look at other ways of composing and everything as well. But absolutely right, it needs to be what the students want to learn, and that, in one aspect, speaks a lot to the benefits of personalization, which of music education for each individual student, especially in a subject like music, where everyone's going to have different interests. There are so many different types of instruments that can be learnt as well. It's not like necessarily English or maths where everyone has to learn the same things. It's like there's so much freedom to it, where one teacher trying to teach a class of GCSE 15 to 30 or possibly even more students, you just can't personalize it that much. But
Mm.
absolutely, that I think is key. Um, so would you say it was your music teacher that inspired you onto your career in the music industry? That key little nugget.
I think he was the first person who yeah, Paul, I think, was probably the first person who put the seed in my brain.
Were there
And
any
then I went,
other big events which spurred you on?
oh, that's so. I think I loved performing live. And I think I was into loads of bands who were just great performers at that time as well. Like my first band were Iron Maiden Obsessives, and they were so performance focused. We used to just watch loads of reruns and Rock in Rio, live at Hammersmith, and all that stuff, and just the energy was ferocious.
Mate, playing bass for
Uh,
that with the three fingers with all those triplets. Did you do
well,
that?
he only actually uses two.
Does
That's his
he?
thing. Yeah, he only actually uses two, but he's got quite a light touch. He's slightly percussive, which is very interesting. I found a little video snippet where he kind of
Wow.
proves it, and the bass internet were like, they were like, "Stop the tracks! We knew he only played with two fingers." It's really funny how into these microcosms people get online. They're like, "No, he uses three. No, he uses two." And then some guy found like a snippet from an Abbey Road session. He was like, "See, he only uses two from
Wow.
Steve's
I mean,
part."
that's
And
still
you're like,
incredible. I mean, James
"Hmm,
Jameson only used one, which is just
oh man." Especially when you listen to something like, holy moly, if you listen to something like "Darling Dear" or "Bernadette," and you're like,
well,
"I
what's
don't know how
going
you're
on.
doing this with one finger."
Yeah.
Oh,
In fact,
it's just the
for
so
what's going
tough.
on, he did it with one finger lying down on the floor on his back, didn't he? It's
Oh,
like,
and blind drunk.
yeah, yeah.
Blind
But he
drunk.
was still that amazing, mate. Anyway,
Oh man, what a
anyway,
dude.
we
What a
digress.
what a what a guy. What a guy. Um, so yeah, I think part of that was just being like infected by like feeling infectious by performance. I remember like the
Yeah,
first gig my band ever did was like a talent show at Downlands, our old school. I don't know if you remember the talent shows, but it would be like everyone, like all the kids would come and sit in this hall.
yeah,
So you walked out onto the stage in front of like hundreds of kids for a first gig. I remember walking out there and being like, wow, this is a lot of people. And we just came out and played Paranoid by Black Sabbath. And
brilliant,
I was hooked by that feeling. And then I think I stayed on to play Smells Like Teen Spirit with another band. So the
nice.
classic secondary school
I tell you what, I
stuff.
want to say on this a little bit because this is something that I feel many people would be able to relate to. How did you feel?
Mm.
I mean, what made you first want to sign up for the talent show?
Oh man, that's a really good question. I
And
think,
and would you have done it if it was just you by yourself?
ooh, that's a really, really interesting question because I do do stuff by myself, and I think I'm one of those people that might be sometimes brave, sometimes delusional, and I'm definitely not always ready. I'll do things before I'm ready, and I'll be like, ugh, that wasn't like the best foot I wanted to put forward, but it has taken me places. Even if I didn't get it all right, I did a good enough job for someone to maybe go, oh, cool, we'd love to have you back, or we'd love you to do more of this thing. At the time, I think we were like rehearsing and learning songs just after school. We used to have band practices after school, I think every Friday, just in the music department. And at the time, we were still getting instruments. Like we were playing Black Sabbath and stuff on acoustic guitars, and then like one of us would have a birthday, and someone would get a guitar or a new piece of gear or like an amp. It was very funny watching it all unfold now in memory. Um, but I think I think this is actually probably what I loved about the bass is that it was like a real team instrument.
Mm,
And obviously there
yeah,
are loads of people who use it in that context and beyond, and they use it in a solo context. But I love the fact that I was like, I still do. I love being part of like a well-oiled machine. I love being part of a team. Um, and I think and I do stuff solo, but I wasn't playing guitar and stuff by then. And you know, I think that's what I loved about it. And I think I can't remember if it was the music teacher asked us to sign up or we were like, oh, are we going to do this? And we were like, yeah, yeah, we should do this. And you know, it was like a non-school uniform day, you know, so we could dress up and stuff. Um, but yeah, I think that's kind of how it unfolded. And then I think I've got to be honest, I think when I think back on it, I probably have a bit of that performer gene where I probably got hooked on the feeling of it
yeah.
as well.
So it was a non-uniform day. Can you remember what sort of gear you wore and like how you
Oh
came to that
man.
decision as like little Sammy?
I think knowing me back in secondary school, I was probably wearing probably wearing combat trousers in some description. I was in cadets back then and just loved wearing combat trousers. Plus it was like
Brilliant.
it was like the early mid noughties, so that thing was still in. Vests and combat trousers was a big part of my dress up back then. I have a
I
lot of photos.
remember that actually. Now you say that. Yes. The
I dressed
vest.
that way
Yes.
a lot. I dressed in vests and combat trousers a lot. I think I was maybe wearing like a manga like shirt as well. That I think was maybe like a hand me down from my older brother.
Yeah.
but I do remember putting, because it was like Red Nose Day. We put the red nose on the headstock of my bass, which is funny. I do, however, remember being so hyped up that I threw it into the audience afterwards, and I think I hit someone in the face. This girl didn't see it coming. All I saw
Oh,
was the red nose going "Ew," towards this girl's face and
brilliant,
walked off before I saw it connect.
brilliant. Oh, so that's fantastic. So it's really the performance bug, which I've seen in loads of students before, especially students with like high anxiety and stuff. I've sort of pushed them to go out onto the stage and perform in front of an audience, and they're like cry really heavily and stuff because it's such an overwhelming experience for them. But
Yeah, big
and
time.
that's like part of a group like Guitar Club or something. And then the next concert they'll come in and do it solo, and I'm like, yes, you got the bug. So yeah, absolutely, and that also happened with me. I can remember back in the day when I had the hair down, down to the bottom of my back, doing all
Yes,
the head banging and stuff, singing heavy metal. Absolutely, that was brilliant fun,
love it.
and I can completely empathise with that.
Mm.
So, when you first started to actually try to get jobs, getting paid in the music industry, how did you start?
Oh, okay. So I probably said my first thing about this is that I got really lucky with like connections. Like my first, okay, I think my very first paid gig. Uh, Let me think about this. Right. Okay. I think my very first paid gig, I was in a like an originals band with a guitarist who used to do promotion. Like he got into promoting, and he used to basically put like book better bands and put us on like the main support slot on nights he'd be promoting, which actually turned out to be a really good idea because we'd always have the audience for the last band, and the audience for the first band. Um, so he started generating a bit of money like that, but it all kind of went back into the band, which was really smart because that's what you want to kind of get to, is a more self-sustaining place with it. I think I remember my first paid gig. Um, I went on to play with an artist who was a friend of my older brother's from college called Tom Staniford, who went on to be in a band called Heath, who I love. Me and my girlfriend love and adored that band. And they have an amazing album. I'm going to say it here. It's an album called Ice on the Jetty. You have to go and listen to it. I think it was a bit ahead of its time in terms of the things it was trying to bring back. But I used to play with Tom, and I went and did Tom's UK tour when I was like 21, first time being in the van and stuff. And I think I remember we did a gig in London, and I think it was like 30, £40 a man. And I was like, whoa, I've never been paid for this before. I've spent all my music education money and spending so long doing it. And I think I spent it all on food and drink that night. So it didn't go very far. But then in terms of like regular employment, I mean, this is bonkers because the jump in these two things is quite wild. Um, I finished university and I was like at BIM, and I knew a couple of guys, and I was approached by some really good musicians, who, in my eyes, who were like looking to do like hotel residencies and cruise ship contract stuff. So we started a band to do that, and this band was great, man. I look back on it now and I'm like, wow, like I was definitely like the worst. There was some of the guys that were so good. Some of the guys were a bit older than me. They were way more experienced. Like the drummer was fantastic. Still one of my favorite drummers to have played with to this day. Um, so we were doing this thing. Coincidentally, one of the tutors at BIM, who used to do cruise ship stuff, he was looking into doing some agenting for it now because he kind of had a connection, and they were looking for some younger bands. And he approached us because he taught a bunch of the guys and was like, "Listen, I'm looking at cruise ship bands. Do you know anyone who's be interested?" We were like, "That's what we want to do." And he was really good for us in a way because he kind of came in and coached us the sort of things that we should have,
Mm.
because it was beneficial for him as well because he was going to make like agenting money off us. Oh, but my goodness, that was a baptism of fire. I don't necessarily recommend that being anyone's first music gig, but man, I've heard other people talk about it. That's like proper music university right there. Scott Devine, if you follow Scott's bass lessons, um, he always said like he didn't do a music degree early on, but he did do a cruise ship gig, and he said that was my music university. And I'd say the same thing, like going from playing like half an hour of songs with your originals band to having to learn like 300 songs, having to play ballroom stuff, and arranged that. And plus, it just made me realize like how much I didn't know
Mm.
in terms of repertoire and stuff. And so yeah, real baptism of fire. But I always say that cruise ship gig, man, changed my life. I say it to students all the time. I said, if you're interested in going do it, go do it now whilst you're young and you've not got the responsibilities and stuff, maybe because it was incredible for me. You know, I lived at home until I was like 21, and then suddenly woke up one morning and I'm in the middle of the missus. Hey, say hi, Rox.
Hello, sorry to interrupt.
um, and then I remember waking up one morning and I was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and looking at the TV and being like, guys, we're literally in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and playing a set to people, which I thought was wild. So yeah, very cool. That really changed my life. And then obviously I went back. I do think if people were looking to get into it, I'd start like a pub covers band, do pubs and then do weddings and stuff first, because then at least you're like, oh, cool, we've got some
Yeah.
repertoire and we know what works.
Trying to
Um,
broaden the repertoire as much as
yeah.
possible. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Although, if you want a full immersion baptism of fire, I mean, that process was very stressful. I mean, I think I remember we did 10 days worth of straight 12-hour rehearsals. Um, and to be honest, we were still a bit undercooked for it. And there was loads of other stuff that came out. There was loads of dramas. People got in relationships in the band and then broke up. And yeah, we did the full Fleetwood Mac with minus a lot more. But I'm going to say minus any drugs. But yeah, but it was. And I think that situation actually taught me like how to like problem mediate and try and talk to each other properly and openly and be honest. And, it didn't always work in some regards, but forced me to grow up quick.
Mm.
Forced me to, real grow up real quick.
So, how did you, from your perspective, try to manage all this? Because that does sound like Trial by Fire doesn't feel like it does it justice, and there are so many different aspects to it. Let's start with, first of all, was it the same band each time you went on a cruise ship? Was it the same members?
So the first time we went away, by the way, was for 5.5 months to the Caribbean. So
Mm,
I'd never lived away from home, and then I
mm.
lived in the Caribbean for 5.5 months on a float on a big fancy floating tin can. Um, and we went out there as a team, and I'd known the majority of the band for about 3 or 4 years because we'd studied together.
Yeah.
And one of them was an old friend from primary school, and we kind of ended up
No
there
way.
together as well. And we're still good. We're still good friends now. Um, so yeah, we went out there like as a team, and it was really lovely and close. But of course, as stuff goes on, things start to fracture. Two of the band, because we had girls and guys in the band, two of them got together, and then they
And
broke up, and that was spectacular fallout.
how did you personally manage to navigate this storm of dynamic changes and chaos in some instances? How did you manage to actually stay as calm as possible in that sort of turbulence?
Oh, do you know, if I look back on it now, and I'm quite open and honest, I mean, there were portions of it which were really difficult, and like probably my mental health actually, in some regards, wasn't that great because I was away from friends and family for like 5.5 months. Internet out there, this was in like 2012, so going back 10 years, it wasn't always reliable. The internet on the ship was crazy expensive and not very good. I think I watched like one internet video in like 6 months, and it was of my friends in a band doing stuff in my old band. Um,
So your whole support system was the band.
in a lot of ways, I'd make sure that I had like some friends outside the band. I
Mm.
think I was quite good at like trying to make the most of the opportunity. Like one thing that you could do is like a guest entertainer, which was like my I suppose my position on the ship, is you could go along with the ship's tours and give them like feedback. So when I discovered this was a thing, I was like, wait, whoa, whoa, whoa. You're telling me I can go along with the ship's tours, the ship's trips on land for free, and I just have to write out a feedback form. Sign me up. I went on all of those suckers, and every
Brilliant.
time I did, I got a sticker, and I'd stick it on my bunk, on my wall, to remind me how much stuff I did whilst I was there. But dude, I did crazy cool stuff doing that, and that was like that was part of my coping. And the rest of the band weren't all that interested, and I was like, how can we not be interested? I like hiked to waterfalls. I kayaked in lagoons. I went like a small submarine
Oh,
somewhere. Uh, yeah, I did like bus trips,
for
hiking
free.
trips. So yeah, cycle trips around Caribbean islands, and I did the same when we came back the second time around. So I got very good at like taking care of myself. I was like, I know what I wanted out of this experience, and that was to do as much as possible.
Mm,
And then on my downtime and other ship days, I'm a big exercise guy. I'll always so yeah, I was exercising pretty regularly. I'd go to the gym most days a week. Um, and I actually used it to try and practice a lot. I'd go and find a space on the ship. There was a little bar right at the back of the top of the ship where my friend's duo used to play. And I used to just go up there in the day and grab my little sight reading book and sit down and just shed the stuff I didn't know. So I did try and put my hours in back then as well and go over stuff that wasn't getting right and learn some other songs, etc. You know, because otherwise I was sharing a cabin with the drummer and we did get on well and we shared a small space very well. Um, but those are like how I held on to myself, you know, is like taking care of me things that I wanted. And a big part of that was just taking the most of this opportunity that, you know, like you don't always get to do again. We were shut inside for a year and a half, 2 years with COVID. And I'm like, look back now and I'm like, wow, I'm so glad I did that. Well done, young Sam. Younger Sam.
yeah, absolutely, mate.
Yeah.
Anyone who's listening to this now and considering that, do it, do it. If I could go back, because I got that opportunity once. I got a connection with someone who was a drummer and wanted to put together a function band because he was getting on a little bit. He needed some young blood in the band because he was like addicted to going to cruise ships and doing that. And but for me personally, I just couldn't be away from my family and friends for 6 months at a time. And
It's a huge commitment.
yeah, I
Like, and
turned it down.
I was ready and I needed that thing at that
Mm,
time, if I'm very honest. Um, I think I was actually probably quite an unhappy young man at that stage, if I'm honest.
yeah.
I didn't really know what I was doing. My parents split up a couple of years previously, and I think I probably needed a bit of space, a way to kind of process some of that. So for me, it was absolutely the right thing at the right time, even if it was a baptism of fire. I would like
That's
to
it.
caveat this with saying cruise ships are definitely not for everyone, and they can be mega intense because your life literally gets the joke is like we're all in the same boat, but your life becomes this ship. And outside of that,
Mm.
I've got to be honest, nothing much really mattered because there was so much interpersonal stuff. There's politics, schedules, you know, back scratching, and you have to learn to get on and try and survive all on this
S-
huge metal boat,
Absolutely. So you
you know.
really need
Um,
developed social skills as well, isn't it?
Big time, and for the wrong people, I think it. Sorry, for the wrong personality types and stuff. I think it's where some people can sometimes see the worst of themselves.
Mm.
There's a fantastic podcast I listened to recently, uh, the Scott Devine, for the Scott Space Lessons one he was talking about, where he talks about his cruise ship experience, but he also said, I have friends who can't leave cruise ship gigs, he said, because they are fully fledged functioning alcoholics. He said they can't come back to land because they won't function anymore. They like need to be there. And also, sometimes if you get into doing cruise ship stuff for a long time, not that it isn't brilliant, but when you decide to come back to land, you've been gone so long that people, you know, all those connections and other people sort of filled your place. So when you do come back, you're probably going to have this slightly famine period of, shoot, I need to find work again, and being to people like, hey, I'm back. And they're like, well, that's cool, but we've already got a guy who did your job now, and we've got a couple of other guys who've done it, you know. So it's not always the easiest to come back from. And
Mm.
I'm very lucky that when I actually did come back from doing contract stuff, I had some guys who gave me a shout because they knew who I was and they liked me as a guy and put me forward to things. And those things really spiraled and led me to like regular gigs I do today as well. So I call myself very lucky, really.
I mean, I can completely see that. That sounds like such a fascinating experience. But thank you for clarifying some of those caveats in there as well. I think that was really important. And
Mm,
when it started, sorry, I'm just trying to get to the little tiny nugget that made it all possible. It was your
mm.
tutor at BIM who you already had sort of a pretty good relationship with. You know, you got on really well with him, and he saw you and your band on a regular basis and saw how good you were, and so he like handpicked you, was it?
So basically, he was teaching like, but essentially like a commercial band module, which was like, build a function band, go and gig. So it was like, in hindsight, when I look back at it and look at what I do now, I'm like, why did I not take that module? It would have helped. It would have helped me a lot before I got on there. But basically, the singer and the guitarist had been doing stuff in that module, and Jules, who was teaching the module, he was like, they're at a good standard. Like, I would trust them to choose good musicians because they had and to put out a good performance, because they were at a
Mm,
decent level. So when they kind of started picking musicians, he was like, I kind of trust that you guys would find good ones, and we did. And we we had, yeah, it was a great band. It was like really cool. We had singer, guitar, like guitarist, sorry, singer, a guitarist who could sing pretty well, and he does a lot of singing stuff now. I was like a bass player singer. I could sing a little bit, and that did actually help to take a bit of pressure off the singer because if he was singing sometimes every night of the week for hours on end, it actually forced us to kind of take some load off her, if you know what I mean. And that was great because it allowed me to kind of step out a bit more and try and be a bit more of a singer and work on that. And then we had a very talented, she was a singer, keyboard player, and also played saxophone, which was like wicked, because we had some cool options. And then the
triple threat.
drummer, yeah, and the drummer was just a beast, and he's still one of my favorite drummers to play with. And he's also a fantastic singer. So it really was like, I remember one of my friends sent me the rehearsal footage of that the other day, and I was like, oh, wow. But I listened back to it and go like, yeah, like at the time we had loads of band turmoil and people not learning songs properly. But I look back and I'm like, we weren't bad. We were pretty good, you know. So we were basically really lucky that two of the guys was being taught by someone. It's that kind of classic music industry thing of who and knowing
Yeah.
people and meeting people is really important. And I hate the whole schmoozing thing. Like, I think it's rubbish, but I do think it's important to meet people and just be honest and genuine with them. Be like, listen, I love what you do, or I love what you did here. I'm just a big fan of everyone. So every time I go to my mates, I'm like, dude, I love what you did in this band, or I was go and watch them. Be like, that solo was wicked, and yeah, I'm just very nerdy. Um, so I think just genuinely
Nerdy.
trying to be like try and be friends with people. Don't try and schmooze people. Don't be like, hey, I've got this many followers on Instagram and stuff
Yeah.
like that. I'm not here for that. But what I am here for is like trying to be genuine and make friends with people.
And that's something
Yeah.
that shows, Sam, honestly, throughout all the time that I've known you. Every time I've even seen you, even after it's been years, it's fantastic to talk to you because you are just that kind of a friendly, honest, uh, and genuine person as well. And
Thank
you're
you.
absolutely right. I think that's very, very important when networking to make friends with people, not contacts, friends, because
Yeah.
that will always give you that extra, that extra boost because the relationships will last longer. And I don't want to think of it in terms of, uh, it'll give you that competitive edge or whatever, because then it brings it back to that whole model. But
Mm,
thinking about it in terms of if you're friends with that person, they will have you more in their mind, which makes sense. And I don't mean it as like this is a good marketing strategy kind of thing, but just how
yeah.
important it is to cultivate friendships and those relationships, especially in an industry which, in all honesty, does rely on contacts a lot of the
And
time.
one thing I think is mega important as well is you kind of have that like the contact mentality is I think is mostly like a thing in the 20s. As I kind of get into my 30s, most guys in the stage who are still doing it and still want to do it are literally mostly about finding the people that they can share very long band rides with, people
Hmm.
that they know they can rely on to learn the songs, people who they know are going to make their life easier on the gigs. Like, are they going to help set up? Um, you know and that's for instance, we were just talking about our mutual friend Rob Pope. Like, Rob's amazing at that stuff, and his band, I can tell you, every single guy in that band is a legend. Not only the great musicians, but they're lovely people. Every time
Hmm.
I've sort of been in that environment, They're very funny. They're very bubbly. They're very, and they've built this thing together. And they're quite selective about who they want to bring in and who they'll ask for people to cover gigs. Because sometimes you can cover a gig and they'll be like, I don't really like that guy. You know, he didn't sort of fit with the rest of us. So whenever you do get asked to come back and play with them, like our friend Rob, if Rob or his bass player ever asked me to cover one of their gigs, I'm very flattered because those guys are great. I love playing with them, and they're lovely guys. Like we have some really cool conversations. And I think as you get older, like that stuff matters more. You're not just like, let's have him because he's the best. You're gonna like, no, I'm gonna have the guy who's I know is gonna be on time. I know he's gonna have this. He always brings spares, always sets up, learns the tunes, and is fun, man. You don't want someone who's
Mm.
gonna like drag your mental health down. If you're in the car with them for like 3 or 4 hours, that is a long car drive.
Yeah.
And then a 6, 7 hour gig, and then the drive home or sharing a hotel room together. Being personable does really matter, and that's going to vary from person to person. I'm not going to say you need to be this guy, but for me, in my experiences, like I know what I look for when I'm with my friends. If I
Mm.
need like a role covering or a depth for a gig, I'll know who I'm going to ask first. And I'll also ask my band if I wasn't there for something. I'll be like, how did this person do? And they were like, oh, they were great. They didn't do this. And then I'll be like, who's your preference for next time? I do have a bit of a list of people we'll go through before we get there. I know it sounds a bit judgy, but it's also a bit like I need to find not only the guy who's going to do the job best, but the one that the guys get on with, and they're like, oh no, I feel
Yes.
relaxed. I'm going to do the best version of this job with this person here.
Because as well as personable skills, there's also some crossover with professional skills as well, isn't there? A lot of
Mm.
people, myself included, would say that things such as helping out in your spare time, getting the stage set up and whatever else, would be part of professional skills as well, because it's those kinds of personable slash professional skills that would help build your reputation, which, same as you said, is as you get on more important than the initial contacts as well.
Yeah, I think I tell you what, I have learned the hard way in some ways. I think actually weirdly that cruise ship contract actually taught me that age doesn't guarantee maturity. I've played with some people who, guys I really looked up to, and as I started working with them, I was like, oh wow, like I think you handled that situation horribly. Like I didn't like the way you did that at all. I thought it was like really immature, or they like lost their lid, or they just did something kind of deliberately. Yeah,
What happened? It's all right. You don't need to say names.
oh man. I just think actually like really immature stuff. Like I remember playing with it's good, but it's a good guy, and we got on well actually. But we had a bit of a falling out about this. I remember we had this argument in band practice once, and they just stormed off, and I was like, I never would have done that. I never would have stormed out of a
Mm.
band practice unless someone did something really horrendous, like basically something illegal or something really, I don't know, like hugely offensive. But I was at the time, I would sort of stepped into this band leader position, and I was trying to kind of hold this band together that what frankly wasn't going very well at the time on the ship. And I remember this moment, it just went off my head. I was like, I'm the youngest member of this band, and I was the youngest member of the band, and I was like, I feel like I'm the one who's like being the most mature about things. And he later on, he did knock on my door. We went for a coffee and we talked it over. And he did come and apologize to me, which I really appreciated. He didn't try and dust it under the rug. He was like, "Do you know what? Sorry, I had a really bad morning. I'm having issues with the other guy and stuff." But then sometimes I've also had that with people where there's been no explanation. And I think trying to hold on to yourself and the values you hold true in bands is something, and sometimes you are going to have to compromise on those, maybe a little bit. But as you get older, you learn to sort of kind of be like, no, I find the people whose values match more with what I am and what I'm after in
Mm.
doing the job. And then that's the thing you try and build with, if you know what I mean. Try and build with the right people.
Absolutely. And all the more important it is to get to train yourself with those skills and abilities as early as possible. And that, again, is one of the things that I love about the BTEC course, because bringing it back to like a student's experience in music education, there's a unit introducing music performance where they need to rehearse, and there's actual grading criteria for how they behave in the rehearsal room. Are they focused? Are they there on time? And all of these professionalism skills, which we're talking about now, and people listening to it will be able to hear and see and get real life insights into how important that is. You know, stuff like what's listed on the BTEC qualification isn't just there for shiggles. It's not just there for the qualification. That's one of the reasons that I'm a big proponent of it and advocated for it in all the schools that I taught at during my teaching career, because it is relevant in and all those professional personable skills. If someone were to do that for a music qualification, it applies to everything. It applies to life, doesn't it?
Yeah, those professional skills will help you in any walk of life. And I do want to caveat this with, I haven't always got it right. I am not squeaky clean. There are
No one is,
frequently
man.
times where I have been late. I've not budgeted for a travel, like for a drive. I've not, you know, sometimes I haven't learnt a song or a couple of tunes properly. But the balance is, I think, is trying to be honest with yourself when you're not, and then maybe examine why you're not.
Hmm.
And if you need help with that, there is nothing wrong with going to someone and asking for help with something. It's like, I'm really struggling to like practice this one thing. Maybe go and ask someone, grab a lesson.
Yeah,
Sometimes you just need to be inspired, and that can be sometimes a bit difficult to maintain as you get older. Sometimes I go through phases where like sometimes I'll get bitten by a bug or really inspired by a conversation with someone. I'll be like, I need to practice, and but yeah, I haven't always got it right, but it's important to always keep trying
yeah.
to keep
And
getting better at that thing.
absolutely, and it's so
Yeah.
important to have the humility as well. I love the example that you gave of feeling like you can go to somebody else for help and be like, "Look, I'm struggling with this bit," because there are so many people, and myself included, throughout my teaching career. I know it was one of my weaknesses of not necessarily knowing who you can go to ask for help, or not knowing when to ask for help with a certain thing. But that's what I loved about most of my schools. They were actually really supportive, and if they saw that that I was struggling with something, they'd come in and help. It was absolutely fantastic. But yeah, it's really, really important to know when to ask for help, and if you know someone who can help, keep them close at all
Yeah.
times.
I will caveat this with being like, I've not been great at that in the past, and luckily my girlfriend has sometimes been just ask for help, just ask for help, just ask for help.
It's a
You know,
very difficult thing for
yeah.
a lot of people. I know it used to be very difficult for me because, it depends on how you're brought up as well, isn't it? About those family
Mm,
dynamics. My my parents always brought me up to be completely independent,
self-sufficient.
to always
Yeah.
do everything yourself. And, it sticks with you. It does. But
Yeah.
that's why students, it's so important, ask for help. Like at secondary school, get used to asking your teacher for help.
Yeah.
Especially for musicians and stuff. That's brilliant. Now we're going to get into some juicy details here, Sam, if you don't mind,
Oh, here we go. Go for it.
of when you were on a cruise ship. Let's start
Mhm.
off with, how much would a musician approximately expect to get paid?
Oh, okay. So this really varies. I think I was actually pretty lucky with my first gig. I know some people who have done stuff for a lot less money than what I went out for. This is, by the way, I realize this month, about maybe 3 or 4 days ago, 10 years ago, was when I first got on that ship, as a bit of an anniversary to this conversation. So it's
Wow.
very apt that we're bringing it up now, because it would have been about 10 months since I first got on, which is very interesting. Oh, can't remember. I think I was on roughly £1,200 a month, £1,200 ish. I think it was somewhere between there, because I think we were actually paid in dollars because it was like an international thing. I think I think it was roughly around that. And obviously, what was quite wicked about that, as being quite young, is that all my kind of rent and bills were paid for on the ship. Like they were providing food, they were providing electricity, water, all the rest
So
of it.
all that money's just
Obviously,
going in the bank.
I mean, I'd like to say that. I'm pretty sure I spent all of it, Bill. I'm not sure what I spent all of it on, but I definitely spent all of it. No, I did come back and invest in some bits of equipment and stuff. So, like, I had some bit of new gear and stuff the next time out. And I definitely did
Mm.
take it as it was, I did also sort of see it as a bit of a gap year. I did go away and I did spend money on going out and having experiences on days off and stuff. So I think that was when I was on. Oh, man, I think that was when I was on. That I think that sounds about right for what I was
Well,
on.
it's
But I
an
was 21.
approximation, anyway.
Yeah, I was about 21 as well, so I was fairly inexperienced. I think when I was a band leader, it was a bit more. I think it was like uh 1,400, maybe even a bit more actually. It might have been like even 1,600 or something. And I think at
Nice.
one point I remember telling that to my mum, and she was like, "How much?" She's like, "You're paying rent when you come home."
Brilliant. So,
So
oh,
yeah.
sorry. Oh,
But on the caveat to this, I would just say I've also had friends who've gone out and done it for a lot less money.
yeah.
And this can really vary, I would say. On like on a slightly like kind of political note, where you're from and your passport makes a big difference to how much you get paid. If you're like a
Oh,
Westerner, you'll make a lot more. Whereas I've met Filipino bands who blow other bands out of the water. Oh my goodness, that nation has incredibly talented musicians. And I'd go and watch these bands on like cruise ships and somewhere else, dude. And they've all got, they're all wonderful people, work incredibly hard, have incredible voices. But I've spoken to some of those bands and they are way better than any other bands like on the fleet. And they'll probably get paid. Some of them might be lucky if they're paid half of what
oh,
you're paid.
wow.
Yeah, man. But for I think some of this is a little bit like it's slightly relative because when they take that money home, like a lot of people who work on ships, they'll take that money home and like after a couple of years or something, they might go build a house on the street.
Mm.
I remember chatting to a slight caveat, a slight story, but we used to have this wonderful waiter on the cruise ship who's Ronnie. Ronnie had a beautiful singing voice, arguably a better singer than most of the professionals who came on the ship, man. He was an amazing singer. And we used to get him up and come and sing with us in the band, which is wicked because the audience would be like, well, isn't Ronnie talented? And it was cool for us because he'd come up and do some different stuff.
Brilliant.
And I remember chatting to him, and I'd be like, "So, you want to do do you want to come and do it with the band?" He's like, "I'd love to, but the opportunities aren't really there for me." But he was saying he was like, "I'm here." He said, "I'm going to do a couple more years because number one in the Philippines, I don't think there's always a huge amount of employment, but his big thing was like these are really good jobs back home, and but they will work every day for 9 months. It is grueling for some of those guys, but what they would do is they save up. And Ronnie's thing was, and this is a beautiful story. I love this. Right? He was like, back home. He said, "There's a valley in my hometown where my family have all built houses next to each other on the same street." He goes, "And I'm going to buy the plot of land next to my brother, where my cousins cross the street and my mum's down the road." And he was like, "I'm buying a house," and I was like, "Oh, Ronnie, I love you." I just thought it was a really heartwarming story. Like his end goal was
Yeah,
to build a house on the same street as his family, and I was like, "Oh, that's beautiful. I love
it
that."
is.
But yeah, sorry. So the money thing is really diverse, and I've also had like Western friends who've gone out and done it for like good couple of £100 less and have worked way harder. It really varies from cruise line to cruise line. Some are stricter than others. I would say for me, and this is a shout out to P&O cruises. Like I was, especially for my first time contracts, I think they treated us really, really well. Yeah, we worked really hard, but it's also part of the gig doing that on a cruise ship. Um, Generally speaking, really well managed. They were very nice to us, nicer than they ought have had, nicer than they should have been in some regards, I think. So I had a very positive experiences with them. But I've also had friends who've worked for different cruise companies who haven't had as good a time, and it's so varied. So much of it is down to the people you work with, and I say that in any walk of life. Most jobs are actually, I think any job is great depending on the people you're with, really.
Mm.
So, but anyway, so yeah, the money can really be big sliding scale, I'd say.
Yeah, absolutely. And you say you worked really hard. A couple of things there. Obviously, if it's something that you love, like performing music, it doesn't really feel like work, does it? But then again, on the other side, there's a lot of pressure when you're doing it professionally on like a cruise ship. And I was thinking, so that students can get some sort of an idea as well about how hard the work is. How many times a day did you have to perform? And when, if at all, did you get an opportunity to rehearse as a band to stay on top of that?
Um, so like as I said before we went, we did like we did like a load of rehearsals, and I think we rehearsed over a week straight. I remember,
So
I
that was
think
all
back to that.
before.
Yeah, but we were still, I would say, very undercooked. Like we were very young,
Mm.
we were very green. We just didn't have all that stuff committed to memory, like at all. Really, I do think to do that job well, you probably need in the realms of somewhere to like 400 or 500 tunes. Um, but what I know that sounds crazy overwhelming for a young person, but like where I'm at in my career, I could probably pull those tunes out of my hat now. I'll go, oh yeah, I could probably blag along to this if someone made a request or whatever. The guys who've been doing it for a long time, they've just amassed this repertoire over a long period of time. They don't expect you to know 500 tunes when you're 21. That's impossible. You just,
Mm.
I know no 21-year-old who knows that many tunes. Um, so a couple of things here. Okay, so averagely we would play 4 to 5 45-minute sets a day, which is like a lot for vocalists as well, you know. And I
Yeah.
definitely RSI struggles, which I had to do, and it made me reevaluate my technique and you know the way I'd sort of play, getting my bass a little bit easier to play sometimes. Um, so that averagely, this would really vary, and this does vary from contract to contract because sometimes I know guys who have done cruise gigs where they have basically done every night for like 3 to 6 months, maybe even longer. I know, crazy. Um, Averagely, I would say when we were on P&O, I think we got, for instance, we sometimes do like a 2 week cruise, and we might get 2 days off, but they might be like after day 10, and then we'd be back on, and then another day off or something. So generally speaking, you could start kind of planning what you might want to do on your day off when you got there. Um, but also we had like a local band who came on, like a local Caribbean band who came on the boat and took a bit of pressure off us, so we got a few more nights off. But when we came back and did a cruise in the Med, like the workload went up. Sometimes we were doing like sometimes like 6 sets a day, and it was
Wow. What,
yeah.
like
Sometimes
6 half-an-hour sets?
sometimes there are. This really depends on like your job because there are different bands on a cruise ship. Our job was what we call like the resident party band. So we were essentially like a functions or like wedding
I love
band on
that.
a ship, which was cool. That did come with a couple of other responsibilities. Like we had to do the ballroom stuff, which was a learning curve in of itself. Because sometimes we'd arrange songs so that they'd fit certain dancing styles. So sometimes we'd have to like arrange them with like 8/16 bars, change the beat, make it like a rumba or a quick step or something. So that was cool, especially when you like got it right and you were like, oh, this worked, and you could see people. They would do dance classes in sequence step to what you were doing,
Wow.
which was, and especially for 21, I was like a big fan. I don't. Well, my mum was like a massive fan of Strictly Come Dancing, but I used to sit with her and watch the band, and you'd go like, "Oh, that's like what they do week in, week out," and that band are amazing, man. So that was a cool experience. But there are different jobs. Like for instance, we had like a duo on the ship who were like a singer, keyboard player, guitarist couple from Seattle, Laurel and Dave. If you listen to this, you're legends. I love you. Um, they were like my ship parents. They helped me through a lot of stuff. But those guys would do like backing track stuff and sometimes some acoustic stuff, and they'd play at the back of the ship. Then there'd be like the resident, what you call the orchestra, and the orchestra can vary in size on ships. Generally speaking, it's like a 5 piece band, and then maybe you'd have a couple of brass players, and they would come on and back the cabaret guys, like the solo guys who would come on the ship. So you'd have like one or two of those who'd come on and do a couple of shows a week, and they would be amazing sight readers because they'd get like a short rehearsal just to run every song once before the show, and then they'd play it that evening. That was it, like which
Wow.
blew my mind because I could not read like that. But it did force me, like when I looked around at some other people, I'm
Mm.
like, oh, actually, there's a lot of work in that if you can do it well.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but conversely, I've not used that skill a lot since I've been off ships. So it's weird with the reading thing that sometimes you can do that thing and do it all the time, or you can not touch it for years. um, so there'll be like the orchestra job. Sometimes you might have like a piano soloist who might be on. Um, yeah, the guest entertainers thing. There are a couple of different jobs on the
And
ship.
what about rehearsal time
Oh yes.
on the ship?
So a lot of this we do what we call like the cabin jam. So what we would tend to do is we'd learn like 4 or 5 new songs a week, and they'd be for like different things. Like we're like, okay, we need 1 or 2 new dance tunes, we need a couple of new party tunes. We try and choose like a handful of songs, or maybe some requests the audience had given us, and be like, oh no, actually that'd be a really good one to have for these occasions. So what we'd normally do is we'd go and learn our parts personally. Sometimes because the drummer and I were in the same cabin, we'd run through it ourselves.
The
And then what we
drum
do
kit
is
in
get
the
everyone
cabin. Brilliant.
no, he just like drum on his legs or something, or the
Oh yeah.
table.
Okay. Okay.
Um, and he had like a little practice pad actually, which is his thing. So
Awesome.
what we do is we'd learn our parts individually. We bring everyone to the cabin jam just to iron out what we were going to do, make sure everyone knew their parts, work on some harmonies or something. And then what we do is check the ship schedule, and then we'd have to like book the room for like as much as we could get it. Sometimes it'd be like an hour or two, and it would just be to steamroll through those songs, just make sure it sounded all right, and then we'd take it on from there. And then basically, whatever songs we did, we would put in the set like every night that week. Just so we're like, are we developing it, if you know what I mean?
That
And
makes
like,
sense.
just, and learning where it might work, what we could maybe go from one song into another with, etc. So,
Being a
yeah,
good old reflective practitioner.
basically, yeah. You want to get good at something, just put it in everything. It's
That's
like when you
brilliant.
learn like a new lick on the bass, you'll put it in like every song or
Yeah.
every kick
And
you'll
then
do.
obviously see
It's
where
always
it works. Yeah. Oh,
and
fantastic.
even where it doesn't work, Bill, even where it doesn't work. I'm so
So
tasteless.
you
Yeah.
had sometimes 6 performances a day. You had to
At its
rehearse
height, yeah.
regularly and learn new songs as well, and try to have time to process the performances and reflect on them as well.
Mm.
How much actual spare time did you have? Because I can imagine some students be like, well, that's all well and good, as long as I get plenty of time next to the pool. Like, how much time would someone actually be able to have to relax there?
I think most of the daytimes are kind of your own. But
Mm.
like, generally speaking, you probably start work around 7, 8 o'clock in the evening. You'll probably work up to 11, midnight. Um, Occasionally you'd have like a daytime performance. Sometimes we do something called like a deck set where we'd go and play above the pool. Now, in theory, this sounds like a great idea. Oh, we were buzzing the first time. We were like, "It's going to be party," and we went up and played a load of party songs, and people were like, "Can you keep it down, please? We're trying to relax." And that's because that's what we were told it was going to be, and we'd sort of build it up in our head, and we were like, "Oh no, wait, these people want like mega chill, very background music." So we changed tack on that very quickly. I remember the first one I did, I've got a photo of me on the deck, and I was like, "Yeah, we're gonna pump it up. It's gonna be party." And then we did it, and we were like, "Oh, we need to completely rethink what we're doing here. These people hated what we were doing." And then like, so we made it really backgroundy, very chill, very relaxed, quite reggae.
Nice.
But so that would be like your daytime thing, and occasionally you do something called a sail away, which would be like when you left a port, you'd come and do like a party. We're leaving. Yeah, I've got to be honest. I don't. This is maybe my opinion. I don't think the audience has ever. I don't know. We always felt like we're like. I don't think anyone ever really cared about this. I felt like it was more just to make the band do work. It's just my opinion. I was like, yeah, no one really cared, man. No one ever really cared.
Oh,
It's
bless.
funny. But
Oh,
sometimes that's the nature of the job. Like you're there and you're paid to do the job, whether people care or they don't care.
yeah. And to be
You know,
fair,
I've done those gigs loads, man. I've sometimes played weddings where like we've been paid to be there and we are throwing everything at it and trying to get people up and like nothing is working. And those are some painful experiences. And
oh
on
no.
those you just sit there and you're like, ha ha ha, and behind this face is just counting the Benjamins, counting the dollars.
Yeah, that's it. At the end of the
But
day.
that is the nature. That like it's like any other job. Sometimes you're gonna have a crap day, and sometimes it feels crap, uh, because you love it. So and because it's a passion, a hobby you've made a job. Sometimes it's really hard to turn
Mm.
off those distinguishes, and like over time I've learned to is sometimes go like I'm trying everything today. It's just a bad day. I can park it. The next one will be better. Like 90% of the gigs I do are great, and there's like a handful a year. I'm like, oh, I want to quit. you know.
Oh man, that's absolutely fascinating. Life on a cruise ship. Now, you've not only worked on a cruise ship though, you've also worked
Mm.
in like foreign hotels. How did you get
Yes.
into that?
So basically, the cruise ship story, like I had a lot of fun on there, but basically the band kind of fell apart after the second contract. People weren't in a great state. It's quite a high pressure environment. You're away from
Mm.
friends and family for a long time, and it's really easy to get burned out. I know some people have done those. Sometimes who've done those gigs and quit music, like they just hated it. I actually think if I look back at it, I think I'm probably a personality type that does quite well.
Mm.
in those environments. And I would go and do it again now, but I've got lots of other things going on back here and jobs I love, and I don't think I really want to leave them. Plus, I've got 2 cats now, and they're mega needy. Um, 2 cats and a girlfriend, I should add. So I but so yeah, basically when that gig finished up, I think I was just looking on the internet. Like, not that the internet is an amazing place to find jobs, but there was an agency called Here and Now Entertainment. I'm going to shout them out because they're really good friends of mine, and they were basically putting bands together for hotel contracts in the Middle East. And I was like, oh, this sounds cool. But that was like I kind of came back home and I was like, no, I want to keep doing the traveling thing for a bit more. Like, you know, I remember I got home, got back to sunny Burgess Hill where it wasn't so sunny and it was peeing it down with rain. I looked up and was like, nah, I'm not ready yet. It's not. I need to go. I need to go away again. I need to go away again. So I went and auditioned for this agency. Um, and I think they were quite interested in having me as like a bass player singer. They were like, oh, we could use you in like a smaller band, because sometimes they put together like 7 or 8 piece bands to go somewhere.
Wow.
Um, so I was put in a band with a bunch of guys who I'm still kind of in touch with to this day. They were really great. Um, but the contract we were going for fell through. And actually, for
Mm.
that contract, we had to learn very different material. I would say, because a lot of the material we had was like quite older stuff, and then this one was like sometimes they'd like you to learn a couple of like Spanish tunes or like quite modern clubby stuff. So that was quite fun actually, because you'd have to try and like, and I quite enjoy this, when stuff's like, like more of a pop song with like no guitars or bass or anything, it's all programmed, but you'd have to like find a band way of playing it, which could be challenging but really rewarding at the same time. Like you'd find a cool way to play it. So basically, I ended up with a band called The Providers, which is a fantastic name for a band. And then I ended up going with these guys to a hotel in the Middle East, in Abu Dhabi, called the Grand Millennium. And I played in a venue out there called Porter's, which was a great gig. It was really enjoyable. I mean, I had my good and bad times, as everyone does, but I did that for the best part of a year. I went there for about 3.5, 4 months the first time around to replace a band who were getting fired, which was a bit awkward for them. But I'd come back with 2 guys who'd been there for like a long time before that, who were a couple. Um, so that was super super cool. And I became more of a singer on that contract. I think that's probably where I learned to be a better singer. Like I was harmony singing all the time, and I was doing more lead stuff quite frequently. Um, but yeah, and I ended up I was there for about a year, and that's actually where I met my girlfriend, who was doing the same kind of thing in a different venue across town, but she was from South Africa, so it was a really happy coincidence that we met there.
Oh, brilliant. And you just hit it
Yeah,
off.
hit it off, baby.
Brilliant.
And 8 years later, here we are. So,
Oh, wow. Wow. So, have you ever been fired?
oh yeah, man. Yeah, I've been fired. So here's the funny
How?
story,
What
right?
happened? Come on.
Okay, one thing I'll caveat is that like the Middle East is a bit of a like a businessy place. There's a lot of money out there,
Mm.
and people are quite businessy. And that gig was great, by the way. We lived in like a 5-star hotel. The gig, like the bar was a great bar in town. Always had a really cool audiences, and sometimes it'd be really pumping on Thursday and Friday, so you could really rock out and have a lot of fun. And uh, it had an amazing gym. I was like a total gym rat at the time. I was, working out every day of the week because it was really hot
Wow.
outside. There wasn't an awful lot else to do during the day. It was too hot basically, unless you like I don't know, sunbathing and swimming. But not that's a bad thing. Um, so okay, so I did that gig for the best part of a year with this band. I moved on. I ended up going to Dubai to be in another band. Funnily enough, that this band was with a guitarist who I used to be at BIM at, who was in one of my old originals bands. So it was really cool to reconnect with him. And the drummer was the drummer from the cruise ship band. So it was this really small, weird, like, I can't believe I'm in this room with these people. Um, but playing with them again was amazing, actually. It's still like one of my favorite bands I've played with. Our playing styles just clicked. Like we kind of knew what each other, I was like, oh, it was really easy to get on board with what everyone was doing, and I love playing with those guys. So I basically came into that band because I was replacing someone who'd been fired because the venue just weren't getting on with the bass player, and he wasn't really enjoying it either. So a tale of firings. The first gig I went to in Porters, the Abu Dhabi one, was replacing a band who were getting fired, and then I replaced a bass player who was getting fired. And when we finished that contract, my band got the gig back at my old venue back in Abu Dhabi, where I was going to be band leading, and I was like, well, I know the gig, so it kind of makes sense for me to be that guy. But they had a new manager who didn't like live music and saw us as an
Oh no.
unnecessary budget, so we got fired after 6 weeks.
Just because he didn't like live music, he saw it as unnecessary.
Basically, dude, nothing other than that. So obviously it was this kind of time where we were like, well, if we could, there's no other work here now because all these other venues have got bands contracted for the next 6 months, a year.
Mm.
So, I mean, credit to our agency. They basically went, let's try and salvage this situation. And it's difficult because out there, when people hold a lot of power, they can kind of do what they want. So it was gutting. And I don't take it as a playing thing. I kind of kicked myself at the time, like, shoot, should I have made different decisions with this? And the guys were like, dude, he was going to sack us anyway. Like, and we backed ourselves as a good band as well. Like, we felt really good about what we were doing.
Mm.
And yeah, he just had it in for us. Coincidentally enough, that guy, apparently that manager, made loads of changes within like 6 months, and then he got the sack just just so as a full circle thing. But what did happen, and this is an interesting part of the story, is that our agency went, okay, hear us out. We've managed to get you guys some duo gigs in. There's one going in Egypt, um, down in was it Sharm el Sheikh, right down on the coast. And there was one going in Greece. So essentially, the band split in two: the drummer and the guitarist, because the drummer was a pretty good guitarist as well. So they went and did a duo in Greece, and then we went and did a duo over in Egypt. And I was like, I played a bit of guitar, but I had to like learn quick because they needed to replace someone there. That actually ended up. Don't get me wrong, musically it was very stressful because I was essentially just like relearning a different instrument, and it was on backing tracks, and I didn't love that. I was like, oh, I missed, I got into it to play with a band. But being down there was quite fun. Like, Charm was a really fun place. I did a load of really cool diving down there. Diving in the Red Sea, man, is amazing.
So,
And yeah, very rock. It was quite fun.
so I was just going to ask, what, what did the change of setting from a cruise ship to a hotel, especially in that particular country, how did that influence the kind of music that you played, especially depending on where you were playing? If it was like as background music in a dining area, or whether it had its own like concert hall or something. How did your musical selection and repertoire as a band change depending on that situation in that context?
That's a really good question. I mean, the audiences we had on a cruise ship stereotypically were older. They're probably 60 plus, retired, had a bit of money. So normally we played like a bit of older funk and disco and Brown Eyed Girl and stuff like that there. When we came to the new venue, number one, like the Middle East is like a massive melting pot of people. Like 80, I think I heard the statistic ages ago, which was 83% of the total population are migrant workers. So you meet people there from all over the world, like everyone's from
Wow.
the Philippines, Germany, Australia, New Zealand, Americans, Ireland, like all over the place. Um, which was a really cool thing about it, actually, is that you meet it was like a real melting pot of like cultures and like getting to meet people, which was very cool. But a lot of the audiences would be younger, like on the club nights. Sorry, caveat. Basically, the hotel had a venue. Its venue was in the basement. It was a pub downstairs. Because in the Middle East, you can only have like an alcohol license if you're like a hotel. So all the pubs and bars are essentially in hotels.
That makes
So we
sense.
played in the pub downstairs. We're on the same stage every night. The only thing that we'd ever change is that we'd go upstairs and play like a brunch set in the afternoon on like a Friday, which was a longer day because we do 2 sets there and then 4 sets in the evening. So that was a long day. After Thursday, which is, and like Thursday is their Friday. That's like
Mm.
big party night. But yeah, so we did a lot more like modern material, a lot more like current top 40, which was fun. As I said, like it kind of kept us quite current, if you know what I mean, because audiences would always come up asking for like the latest song, and we'd be like, "Oh, cool. Well, we know what to learn for next week." And
Brilliant.
that was really helpful. So yeah, a little bit less kind of traditional, but I also think actually that got my pop repertoire up to a really good place that when I kind of came back to the UK, I knew so much stuff that I could kind of jump in on wedding band stuff, and I'd know the majority of it as well, which was really good. But we still do like wedding classics, like I'm a Believer, Sweet Child of Mine, Don't Stop
Oh
Believing,
yeah,
all that, yeah, Mr. Brightside and all that stuff. Yeah,
classic stuff.
classics.
So if you could now go back and if you had zero responsibilities and if you could go back and do one of them again, which one would it be? Cruise ship or hotel, and why?
I personally found cruise ships more, in some way more fun because I think I've got to be honest, I really enjoyed being at sea. Um, that was a really cool thing to have. I was really lucky that we had some quite nice cabins, small but nice. One of my favorite things was I used to come out my cabin door in the morning, I'd turn left, go through another door, and I'd be right on the front of the ship. And I used to just go out there every morning, coffee in hand, just literally sit there and look at the sea or just watch the place that we were going
Wow.
into. And that for me was really cool. So I've got a lot of positive memories about them. And I'm sure, like, if I got back on one now, I think I'd probably find it harder as an older person to go back to sharing a room probably about the size of the one I'm in now with another person. Like I'd probably
With a
struggle with
bed the
that if I went
size
back.
of one of them shelves.
Dude, like that, yeah, real talk.
Wow.
So yeah, I probably would struggle with it a bit more now, if I'm honest. But I think the travel of the cruise stuff I loved. If you like
Mm.
the stability in having like a really nice living, then the hotel's another one. The only other thing I think I've got to be honest, I think the only other thing I'd really do now is I might do a hotel contract, but I'd want to do one over in like the Far East because my girlfriend did a couple in China, and I was like, they sound bonkers and very, very different. So that's probably kind of torn between the two, to be honest. But I'm also feeling like if the right opportunity came up at the right time and it was a short cover thing, I'd do it again. But I don't know now. I'm sort of 31 and got some cool teaching gigs I love, and I've got some great bands and other projects and stuff I'm with. I don't
Yeah.
know if I'd want to go back and do it again. But if my life falls apart over 6 months, maybe we could do this from a cruise ship. And if my life ever does fall apart and I end up back on a cruise ship, Bill, we will do this from a ship, and
Brilliant.
you'll
Brilliant.
see it firsthand. There we go.
Well, I'll tell you what, this has been absolutely fantastic, Sam. Thank you so much. I've just got a couple of questions to finish off with.
Far
Some
away.
personal questions. So, first of all, what is your favourite, considering your massive repertoire, what's your favourite instrumental or vocal solo, either to listen to or to perform, and why?
Vocal or instrumental solo? Um, oh man. In terms of solo, I mean, I learn like a couple of bass solos now and again. There was a solo I learned recently as a transcribing thing. I've never played it on a gig, um, but there's a beautiful sax solo on is it Billie Holiday's "All of Me," which is a jazz standard. I was just learning this beautiful solo, but
All
go
of
check that out.
me.
Yeah, dude, it's got this beautiful trumpet solo, which I students will hear me play all the time in class. They're like, "What is that?" I'm like, "I'm not improvising. I'm just ripping that entire solo off because it just sounds lovely." Just because I've been trying to go back and learn a bit of jazz vocab stuff. Oh, otherwise solos. I was a bass player. Like I can do them a bit. I
This is
don't
it.
love doing
It's
them.
tricky as a bassist. It's tricky as a
Okay,
bassist to try and think of
one
one.
one thing I will say is that I have had Skype lessons with this guy. There's an amazing. I'm going to shout him out. Is a singer bass player called Seth Horan, and he does solo bass stuff. So he does loads of tapping,
I've
harmonics, chords.
so much respect for people like that.
Oh, dude, like Seth's not really on Spotify. You got to go check out his Bandcamp, and there's some stuff on YouTube. But for me, I genuinely think he's one of the best songwriters I've ever heard. Like, which is crazy coming from like a bass point of view. And I know it sounds really biased, but he, I've had Skype lessons with him, and I think he blows my mind. He's got an album called Conduit, which is like one of my musical bibles. And there's an incredible song on there. I'm gonna say the song, the first tune in the album called Anonymity is beautiful. Oh my God, I've forgotten the name of the second song. It's like this tune with he puts some harmonics on and then does like a groovy bass line. Um, it's called Understatement. Understatement.
Ah,
It's
brilliant.
oh my God. Right. So he does some like cool harmonics and then he loop pedals it with like a groove underneath. But there's this beautiful emotional song about like understating your feelings for someone, because he used to like meet people on the road and then he'd be passing through and he'd like never see them again. I like, yeah, dude, that song unlocks me every time I listen to it.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thank
Yeah.
you so much for all the insights that you've given us today, Sam. I really, really appreciate it. And I hope to have you back on some other time to talk about another stream that you've pursued of education, teaching, which obviously is something that we're very, very passionate about here. So I'd love to hear more about that next time, if you'd be up to it.
Anytime, my man. Anytime. It'd be lovely to come back and talk
I
about
really
it. It's
appreciate
nice to
that, Sam.
reminisce.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it. I hope you have a wonderful time.